And you should be good to go, Colleen.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kent Branch October 2022 educational presentation. My name is Colleen LeBay. I'm part of the Kent operating team, and I'm your host for this evening. Thank you very much for joining us. Before we begin tonight's presentation, Bob Daly, a member of the Lenape Nation and a Kent Branch member, offers a territory acknowledgement.
The land on which we gather, learn, and play is the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lunapawak, and Potawatomi peoples who have long-standing relationships to the land, water, and region of southwestern Ontario. The local First Nations of this area include Chippewa of the Thames First Nation, the Caldwell First Nation, Chippewa of Kettle and Stony Point, Oneida Nation of the Thames, the Delaware Nation at Moraviantown, the Munsee Delaware Nation, and Walpole Island First Nation. Additionally, there is a growing urban Indigenous population who make the cities of southwestern Ontario home. We value the significant historical and contemporary contributions of local and regional First Nations of Turtle Island.
We do have a couple of housekeeping items. Our presentations are recorded and they're available on our Kent Branch YouTube channel, which is open to everyone. Your microphones and cameras have been turned off, but we welcome your questions. If you hover your mouse near the bottom of your screen, you'll see a bar with the chat icon. If you click on it, the chat box will open. Here you can type your message or questions for us and for the speaker. Linda Patterson is with us here tonight, and she will be monitoring the chat box for us. Thank you, Linda. Okay, so let's get started. For anyone joining us for the first time, let me tell you a little bit about Ontario Ancestors. Ontario Ancestors, also known as the Ontario Genealogical Society, is a nonprofit registered charity which was founded in 1961. It is the largest genealogical society in Canada with a mission to encourage, bring together and assist those interested in the pursuit of family history and to preserve Ontario's genealogical heritage. Be sure to visit the website to learn more about the resources and support available to assist in your family history research. Ontario Ancestors has over 30 branches all across Ontario, and we are the Kent branch. Our family history library is located on the second floor of the Chatham Public Library. It holds 40 plus years worth of historical and genealogical records for Chatham, Kent. We're open to the public on Fridays and Saturdays from 1 until 5 p.m. We always like to connect with people interested in genealogy and local history. You can connect with us at this email. You can also join our Kent Branch Facebook group, which has over 700 people who are interested in genealogy and Chatham Kent history. We also have a very comprehensive website with lots of resources for both our branch members and the public. With the cooler weather upon us and people having a bit more time, we want to remind you about the ongoing newspaper index card project that's been going on now it's actually into its second year. We've made great progress scanning and transcribing, but we can always use more help. If you think you might be interested, you can get more information on our website if you look under the projects menu. Out of 171 drawers, 138 of them have been scanned and 108 of them have been transcribed. So we're well on our way, but we can always use more help. On the project website, there are always a few drawers available for transcribing. You don't have to do a whole drawer. So if you're up late and you can't sleep, come on in, grab one of the worksheets, open the images and transcribe a few. Do 1, do 20, do a whole drawer if you have a lot of insomnia. There are instructions, including a how-to video on the website. And if you have any questions, there's an email address there. You can reach out and we're happy to show you how to transcribe. Next month, our final presentation of the year will be extra special. People have been asking for an in-person presentation, so we are organizing one and we're very excited. We're going to be returning to McKinley's Funeral Reception Center on Friday, November 4th at 6:30 p.m. Please note the earlier start time. To help kick off Remember Today events, we're excited to welcome Pipe Major Walter Tomaszowski from the Chatham Legion Pipe and Drum Band. Walt will join us in full uniform and treat us to some piping and drumming before sharing the history of the band, its members, and the role in our community. The presentation is free and open to everyone. Please spread the word, bring a friend, and join us. Information will be available on our website and in our Facebook group. So let's get to tonight's presentation, Not Researching in the Rain, Researching in England from Away by Alan Campbell. Alan is a passionate researcher and author who enjoys building the stories of his ancestors and some that are borrowed because they're interesting. He enjoys giving back to the hobby by helping others with research strategies, resource suggestions, and the sharing of his own research. He's a longtime supporter of the Ontario Genealogical Society and its goals. Alan is a past president of the Society and has served in many, many other roles. We're very pleased to have Alan join us. Welcome, Alan. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and pass over control to you. Do you want to share your screen, Alan?
Gives me great pleasure to be presenting to the folks who are online today, and for a branch I belong to, Kent. And without further ado, I'll get started because I'm sure some people are wondering about the title, if you looked at it. So I should explain that first. The travel planner person in my family is my wife. What she does is she plans the trips, and then I make them go out of the way to go to cemeteries and other locations like that. She's very interested in cruises and booked us on a cruise that was to take us from Southampton to Norway, back to Southampton, back to Norway, through Iceland, across the Atlantic to back into New York. So she had set that up. About 2 months before we were supposed to sail, it suddenly dawned on me that we were sailing out of Southampton, and the Isle of Wight, which is within high-speed ferry distance of Southampton, is where a large percentage of one side of my family came from. And I thought I should fit in a trip there. Well, I had not done any research basically on that side of the family because there was a gentleman in England who was doing reams of research, and actually at last I heard of him, he had a 1,000-page book, which I don't know if it ever got published. He passed away recently. So anyway, 4 days on the Isle of Wight, frantically finding a place to stay at Newport, and we headed off, only to find out that we arrived in the rainy season. And as you can see from the picture, it is raining on Holyrood Street, and the importance of Holyrood Street is that is where my ancestors ran boot and shoemaker businesses over the years. You will notice a jacket picture on the left-hand side. I have actually done a presentation a couple of times about preparing for a trip to an archives or research trips and all that, but never once did I ever talk to anybody about proper clothing. I discovered when it was an absolute downpour on a Tuesday morning, which I chose to use to go to the records office because it wouldn't have been fun trying to travel some of the other sites. I discovered that this coat, beautiful as it is, with the zipper pockets, had no facility at all to keep the rain out. Thank God I had brought Ziploc bags with all of my stuff in them. So that is the story behind not researching in the rain when we're online today. I'm tossing in some disclaimers here because during the COVID, since I was at home most of the time and not traveling, I decided that I might as well have access to things. So I had a subscription to Ancestry, a subscription to Find My Past, and that, as you notice, that's the world edition of Ancestry, and I note that because that allowed me the access to English records. I also had a subscription to to My Heritage as well. I have two interesting names, Atkey and Grapes, which it's a whole lot easier to search for things using the name Atkey than the name Smith. So that's an advantage. And you can see some of the other things that I've noted there, including the fact that the Family History Library is only 10 minutes from my home, and you'll find out why that is a bonus. What I did have, courtesy of my cousin in England, were some charts of family. But as you notice on this one, this is one of those ones that you take it with a grain of salt because you don't know whether there's anything accurate on it at all. I do want to point out three things on it. On the left-hand side, note the second given name, Nile. Notice that there's a couple of them that have those. Note James Atkey, he's my line, coming to Canada as a missionary to Indians in the, or Indigenous folks in Campbell Township, Grey County area. And keep an eye on Henry here, who is supposed to be the son of Charlotte and Edward Atkey, Charlotte Grapes and Edward Atkey. So keep him in mind because we're going to come back to him. This is an example of why it was a little easier for me. The Nile, notice the Nile, notice all of these names, Nile, Wellington, Trafalgar, Waterloo. I have not been able to prove or find any reference to John being a soldier or anything like that, or a Navy person, but he was obviously interested in the war era of Nelson, the famous sea captain or admiral. This is the other side that I'm talking about. You'll see me use the terms boot and shoemaker or cordwainer, and cordwainer is an English term for boot and shoemaker. This is a listing of all the types of records that I accessed online. I have broken them apart to talk about them in this presentation, but when I was doing the actual work, I did not necessarily break them apart. Those things that you want in your back pocket. What religion did they belong to? And at the time that these ancestors of mine, the time period I was researching was at the time of the rise of the Wesleyan Methodist group, and they were not well received by the Church of England or the Anglican Church. So it makes for interesting information that you find in newspapers of the day. Trades were becoming more common, and what I found really interesting was that the time period I was researching, women had trades and were noted in the trade directories, which was kind of neat to move away from farmers and that. Although the salt of the earth, it was still good to see trades. strong recommendation. If you have a location name, Google it to see where it is. I had some I'd never heard of before, and when I Googled them, I discovered they were maybe 10 kilometers away from one that I knew where it was. I think the best example I had of needing to do this was someone who approached our own Lambton branch with this place that was called Lambton something, and wanting to know about it and where it was, because that's where her ancestors were from. And when I Googled it, I discovered it no longer existed because it was under the asphalt of an Etobicoke parking lot. So it helps to Google them and make no assumptions about where they actually are. And definitely, if there's a genealogical historical site that covers the area in which you're interested, check it out. I have a wonderful ordnance survey map of the Isle of Wight, which helped me when I started to look at where people were baptized or born or got married, it's a small island, and it even became smaller when you realize, as I said earlier, that some of the places were maybe 5 or 10 kilometers apart. So the movement from one spot to the other was not surprising. When you're looking for baptisms, births, marriages, burials, deaths, I've noted here where I went, and this recommendation, like for Ancestry.ca, the World Edition, I used both the general search and I went directly into the catalog collections as well, because not all of the catalog collections are caught in the general search. They're not included. And I give you an example there. Via the catalog, I was actually able to find Methodist registers, and they were the actual images of the registers in full color, which was beautiful to see, easy to read. And then indexes. Find My Past has the Fillmore marriage registers, which are just basically images from where someone abstracted the marriages from the records and listed them. So not as good as actually getting the actual registry. Now, Find My Past tends to drive people to FamilySearch.org, and I'll reference that more than once probably because that's important to know. Here's an example from Family Search. I looked up my great-grandmother Jane Trafalgar Grapes, and what it tells me here is that there is an image available, but what I have to do, and this is what happens frequently with FamilySearch.org, is you have to go to the Family History Center or go to a location that has access through as an affiliate library. This is your cue, Linda. Okay, I guess Linda has unmuted.
I can jump in, Alan, just
Okay.
to point out, I think we wanted to let everyone know that the Chatham-Kent Public Library does have affiliated status with Family Search. So if you are looking to access some of those records, you can reach out to the reference desk at the Chatham-Kent Public Library.
Okay, thank you, Colleen. And London also has a family history library if you happen to be in the London area. Here's an example of a birth register, a baptism actually, 1805 for Jane Trafalgar Grapes. And if you look at, well, on my screen on the right-hand side, it's covering part of it, but it's kind of cut off. So it was a case where sometimes what you have to do with these old records is you have to go backwards and forwards to figure out where it fits in time, because it does tell you on the left-hand side the date of the baptism, and on the right-hand side it does tell you the date of birth. Then once you get past 1838 and on, then you access them through the GRO, or the Government Registry Office. And this is an example of looking it up on Find My Past. And what it does is it gives you the information you would need to go look to order the record. You're talking volume 28, birth quarter 1, which means January, February, March. It happened in one of those 3 months, and the page 494. Now, I might comment here that when you start paying money to order these, you want to be really careful that you're actually got the right person. I have had more than one person say to me that they went through 4 records before they finally got the one they wanted. And again, if you look him up, Henry James Atkey in this case, on the familysearch.org website, it gives you the same information again, page 494, volume 28, and January, February, March. It stipulates what the registration quarter is, and that's all, and the registration year. That's all the information that you need to be able to go in to order it. You can also use FreeBMD, the website, to research and find them, and it helps if you know your way around some of the areas. Again, you could it can get interesting, because I decided one time I was looking for a Louise, and I wasn't sure whether she was actually the father's child or the male person in the house that was sort of, so to speak, the father. And I decided to search without a surname. And over a space of 3 years, I had so many that it was just terrible. Like, it was a huge number. So you need to do your research before you start plugging in names, and make sure that you've got the right ones and you've got them close to the area you want to be. This is the result. Just so happened that over that period of time, there was only one Henry James born on the Isle of Wight. And again, you see the 2B 494 and 1858. And this is the website for the General Registry Office. To use it, you first want to register, and that doesn't cost you a dime. And then once you register and officially log into it, it has sections on it that it shows you what you do where, and you can actually search on it. You can actually search the records on it, do the whole job totally within, but I prefer to use the outside sources and then go in and select it and pay for it. I haven't shown a whole lot of screens from inside. If you haven't used it, you get to play around on it like I did to learn it the hard way. It's not difficult. This is an example of the birth registration 1858. And this is for Henry. Remember I said something about Henry? And it's interesting because if you remember, Henry was supposed to be the son of Edward Atkey and Charlotte Waterloo Atkey. But lo and behold, look what we've got here. We have name and maiden surname of mother, Charlotte Atkey. So that suggests it is not Charlotte Waterloo Grapes that was the mother. At that time, Charlotte Waterloo Grapes was, I've got it here, 43 years old. And Charlotte Matilda Atkey was 15. So I'm speculating, because the father's name is not there, that it probably is the daughter's child. Now, interestingly enough, can't leave it like that. I went in to check the census records, and Henry was not listed with the family in 1861 when he would have been, 3 years old. He was not listed in 1871 with either his grandmother or his mother, who had married previous to that time, and just shortly after that. But I did find a Henry who was living in a household outside the town of Ventnor, who was age appropriate and who had been born in Ventnor. And it appears that he was given to someone else to raise, and then was placed into an apprenticeship and learned to be a blacksmith. And when I checked his marriage record, there was no father's name provided in it either. In fact, there's that's the only one. They don't tend to give the mother's name on those, and it was blank anyway for the father. So interesting. Nothing proven for sure. Family Search has collections, and you can find them when you're searching like this. This is going in. One of the routes I go in, and I'm not sure how many people do that, but when you go to the search screen and you get the search screen up, the initial one up, you go down below it and it's got the map of the world. And I often go in by the map of the world and hit England and then look for the specific collections they have. And that's how you can find this one easily. Here's an example of a pre-1838 or pre-civil registration family, a marriage record. And this doesn't give you much information. As you can see, October 12th, John Graves to Hannah. This is another one that's found on familysearch.org, Hampshire Parish Registers. And it's what you want. The previous one is like what they call a bishop's transcript, where it's sent into the bishop, and I guess they decided they did the minimum amount of work. And here you'll see that because this is the actual parish register, it has the days in which the banns were read, and that basically was the marriage. Like once the third ban was read, they were read out in the church, then they were married. Doesn't give you a whole lot more information. Notice a little short of information about parents and the like. Now, by 1835, and this is one of the records I brought back from my trip in the rain on the Isle of Wight, this is for James Atkey. And notice that for those people that are real fussy about the way their ancestors' names are spelled, I got used to searching under A-T-H-E-Y, because sometimes I'd find my relatives that way. And what I discovered too is I thought, being settled with the name Trafalgar, I thought maybe these females would not have been impressed, but truth be known, they used them and through their life. And in fact, my grandmother, James and Jane's daughter, she was named Ellen Trafalgar. And so I thought they were more, I guess they liked them. I guess maybe that's the style of English. I'm not sure. I know when I saw it with my grandmother, I thought maybe she was related to some kind of noble or something like that with a name like Trafalgar, but not to be. They were tradesmen and tradeswomen. Okay, and here's the example of when you search on family search for a marriage or civil registration of a marriage. Again, it's similar, like you're looking for location, page, volume, registration year. And the interesting thing here is it also suggests possible spouses. So if you already know who if you've got a pretty good notion who the spouse is, then you're allowed to get the right one the first time through. But notice that they're saying there's 3 that could be spouses there in that time, in that period. So you have to be careful with that. And here's Charlotte Waterloo Grapes and her marriage. And you'll notice over that does give the father's name, Isaac Atkey, and John Grapes. Gives much more information, even notes that they were married in the Wesleyan Chapel. And that's the interesting thing too, is that because some of them changed their religion to Wesleyanism, they rebaptized or were late baptized. And in case with my James Atkey and his family, sometimes there were 3 kids baptized on exactly the same day at 3 different ages. They were born at 3 different times. For burials, This is an example of what you get in 1794. And not too much to make connections on. And this is one once civil registration had opened up. And Anne Atkey, wife of Isaac Atkey, notice shoemaker. So that, you know, the clues, the trade that they carried on. What was interesting at that period of time is that under informant, it would appear that there was somebody who stayed with them and was there at the time of their death, who wasn't necessarily a family member. Margaret Richardson, I did some research, turns out she's the wife of a shoemaker. And during the period of time that she was being was written in on some of these forms, her husband passed away. She's a widow, but she carried on doing it. So you have to kind of ignore that to a degree when you're trying to match into families, because that person has likely nothing to do with the family other than being a friend in that location. Censuses. One of the things that was disappointing about the 1841 England Wales census was it does not tell where the person was born. It just says they weren't born in the particular location where they were at the time the census was taken. So what happened, the unfortunate part of that is that for my John Grapes, he had passed away before the 1851 census. So I have no idea where he was born and have not been able to find that. Whereas for his wife, it specifically places her in a location. So you can find 1841, 1851 on Ancestry. You can find them on Find My Past. Most of the censuses I checked, later than that, I was going through the World Edition of Ancestry.ca. Now, the censuses are indexed on Family Search. And some of the cautions with the index ones is that it doesn't tell you necessarily the whole family, so that they, in fact, I saw one that was indexed and it just indicated there was somebody else with the household. And yet when you look at the census, there's about 4, not just the one other person. So those are places to look, so that it's not just that they're in one location. Do check census. This is one of the things I had. Like it was, I found the baptismal records relatively easily for all of it, like for the Grapes family. What the difficulty came when you tried to tie them together later on and make sure that you had the right people, because same with the Atkeys, like, although it's a small island, there was a slew of them and same names, and in some cases, same occupation. So you had to be really careful. So what I did was check all the way through the census, trying to track each person. And for example, here's Martha. And she's living with her brother, George Grapes, who's on the previous page. That's why you don't see Lucy and his children are there. George was the policeman in Newport for a lot of years. And notice Martha has an occupation, dressmaker. That was a common one. And you see William at the age of 15 is already an ironmonger's assistant, which I remember searching right, he's working in a hardware store. Lucy and Fanny have no occupation, and I don't know whether, and they never did have an occupation specified, so I don't know whether that's because Dad left them lots of money to live on. Now, I was really lucky that the Isle of Wight Family History Society, which I joined many years ago and read articles in, and in fact, Fred Atkey, who was the researcher in England, who passed away and I have never been able to find out whether he actually published this 1,000-page book anywhere, or whether there's a copy of it that exists that I could even get close to. He wrote a lot of articles for the journal. So I was able, and they have, one of the things they've got is where you can go in and search all their journals. And I went in and I just picked off every article related, and some of them weren't what I wanted, because I was sticking fairly close to straight line descendancy, because as I'm building a book of family for my grandchildren, and I'm trying to do more direct line ancestors, or else it's just going to get far too confusing to do it. So I just eliminated the ones that were irrelevant. But look down on the left-hand side there, what's available, like newspaper BMD announcements, patient records, military tribunal school logs, burials, war service reports, inquest reports, guardians of the poor reports. Now, the neat thing about this is a family history society that got with the times quickly. I pay, I think, in the ballpark of £9 for an away membership, and I get the four journals a year digitally. You can't beat that price. Like, to belong, it's slick. And with what they've got here, because like the burial records were neat. They're not original sources, but what they did, they went through all of the church's records and they recorded them. They took pictures of the tombstones and matched them to the information, so that it's transcribed information, which, you know, should be back checked, but that's a little difficult to do when it's sitting in England and you're confined to Canada. But it gives you, I was able to get a lot of information. And the other neat thing about it was that it would put two people in under the same stone, which also helped you connect, make sure you had the right people when you were researching them, and got them married and dispatched, both in the, as I've heard people say. Now, you may well be familiar with this already. This is something that's of value. Catherine R. Wilson, a genealogist in the United States, actually compiled a huge PDF listing of Facebook groups from around the world. And you can go in there and check to see what's there. Now, updating, I just read on the web just recently that updating has been taken over by Cindy at Cindy's List. I did check it on Cindy's List. It is still under construction, so that's why I provided the link, and that's in your handout. Because go directly to it, download it, and save it. Because if you're on Facebook, it's the place you're going to find information about them, and there are reams and reams of them in that PDF. Directories I used as well. I use two locations specifically. There's a lot on Ancestry. I found a free site, a University of, and I'm not English, so I'll probably say that, Leicester's Special Collections. And if you use that as the specialcollections.le.ac.uk, it's not showing as a link, but if you use that and search on that, you'll find access to it. And they've got a reasonably good collection for England. What's in them? You don't necessarily get all that you'd like, but it does place them in a location, with the caveat that in the time that a directory it takes to get the information and compile it and print it, somebody could move. But in this case, any movements tended, with my family, tend not to be far away. So I've got two here. I've got Isaac, and there he is on Holyrood Street, as I noted, and that's in Newport. But I put in the one that I was quite pleased to find that females listed as tradespeople, and Jane Atkey, wife of John Atkey, and she's a milliner, dressmaker, and she got into fur work later on, and I think she carried that job on. She was carrying that job on while married, which didn't always seem to happen. And it's a couple of cases it looked like as soon as the marriage occurred, then the wife was no longer occupied or not listed in the trade directors. But I think this was kind of an interesting situation because John Atkey never seemed to strike out on his own as a boot and shoemaker like his dad Isaac in it. And I'm wondering if she carried a lot of the finances in the family as well. And he died early, so it was really good that she had that backup of the trade. Love newspapers, always into newspapers. I used my primary sources I've noted here. I use the newspaper collection on Find My Past. I won't talk about how you go about using the search function because I found it could be really interesting. It has two sections on it, one primary search and then a secondary where you can put something else in. And sometimes I found that even though I put something in the primary, it drove the search on the secondary. And it took a lot of playing around sometimes to find things. And I waded through a lot of stuff. For example, never in my dreams did I think that grapes was going to cause me problems related to fruit. But when I searched on that, I would have to wait. I waded through hundreds of ads for grapes on the Isle of Wight and further, but it was interesting because there's a large number of newspapers in the area and they tended to carry things that they weren't quite in the area, or they were covering 6 different areas. So when you search that collection, you'll find that it's not just the local newspaper you're necessarily looking in. In fact, one of them got in trouble with, he was a postman, and he actually got fired because he complained about his boss was using post office time to create a directory, which later they decided was not a good thing to do, but that didn't help him any. He was fired before the time came, and he made a lot of press because he sued, he ended up in court and all that. So the huge number of articles about him. I used the Gazette as well. That's the official government one where military appointments and people being moved and court cases and all that kind of thing. And I've got an example coming up, and that's a free access site. I have no experience with the British Newspaper Archive. I'm told it's a good one, but since I already had money invested in the Find My Past site, I didn't choose to add to my cost. Examples. Now, one of the things I really look for are the life stories, and this one was kind of neat. The accident where James came close to being badly injured, and because of the carriage accident, and it was kind of interesting because they just announced Bruce Museum in Bruce County announced the whole digitization of newspapers from that area, and I went in and searched them today and discovered that one of my Simses had actually been in a carriage accident. So I guess there were a number of them. This was interesting. This one popped up, and I discovered that John Tinman or Brazier, who worked making tin items, was thrown in jail because he had creditors. And I found the newspaper article, and I couldn't believe it. There were 30 creditors, and it was interesting because it almost looked like he had got certain materials from one person until they'd no longer sell them anymore, and then he went to somebody else that was doing the same thing, because there'd be 3 or 4 who were in the same business. So this is interesting. There was newspaper articles about it, and this one was in the London Gazette because this is the official one, because the creditors are supposed to meet. And I thought it was interesting that they were meeting at a coffee house, not any more official location. And they were going to decide on what they should do with the estate. Apparently, they must have worked something out because he was still working as a tinman up until his death. But he was lucky. Right around the time that he was thrown in jail, they changed the laws. Prior to that time, you could be thrown in jail as a debtor and you never got out. So your family basically starved to death or went into a workhouse or something like that. They seemed to manage to work something out, and whether maybe long-term payment to creditors or whatever, I don't know, but it seemed to be a little better. He got out of jail anyway. The other thing I looked for was things about marriages and births to try and to see if I could flesh out things, like especially for the early marriages, knowing, trying to find parents' names, because as I showed you that early marriage record, there were no parents' names at all. And here's an example for John Atkey and Jane Stevens, who was the milliner that I was talking about earlier. The best you get is they're both of this town with no parents' names. Or you get a mention of the parents were from the Atherton area. So then you search to find out where Atherton area is, because that gives you a location where you want to look at it. Notice here we've got them getting married in an Anglican church, but their children were later on baptized Wesleyan Methodist. And the trials and tribulations of apprentices. Apprentices sometimes got tired of what they were being expected to do, and they took off. And this is a relative of Abraham's whose apprentice took off, and he's trying to get him back. And what I didn't include in it, there was actually a description of what he looked like and what he was wearing. And but I did not see anything to indicate that it had been found. And if they knew what was good for them, they probably made sure they hid really well or disappeared a long way away, or maybe joined the Navy or something like that. Not that that would have been much better. The other thing I like to do is get into books to look at or find information about it. And I found this one about the art and mystery of a cordwainer. And it talked about life, and you kind of get an impression as to why an apprentice might like to take off, because they basically moved in with the person they were apprenticed to, and they were being moved like I talked about Henry Atkey earlier on. He was basically apprenticed by the time he was 10 years old, and they had long days. They worked long days, and some of the jobs they had were very difficult. And it took a long time to become a journeyman, or to move to the point where you could maybe set up on your own, and you could be 20 years old by that time that happens. And one of the references that John made was to his concern that journeymen were getting together and drinking, and he thought that the public drunkenness was not good. But I looked at that and thought, well, maybe they were letting off a little steam because the job was difficult. Now, I found too, because they were tied into Methodism, I went into some of the books about Methodism, and these are ones of the era, like Methodism in the Isle of Wight was written when John was actually on the Isle of Wight in the position of preacher. The one at the bottom is kind of a different one, because through Isaac Atkey's wife, Anne Yelf, there's a cousin who was made famous in a pamphlet or a booklet at the time as a dairyman's daughter. And she had left home and became a ladies I'm trying to think of the right British term for it, working with a lady, and so she generally was able to dress fairly well because she was more so than the person working in a kitchen. She could dress better, and they might provide clothing that was appropriate to be seen around her mistress when she's working on her. And then she went back home to look after her aging parents, and then she kind of helped out in the community and helping other families, and that died early, and he made her famous. And actually her pamphlet, what was interesting was the pamphlet about her was probably being circulated among people in Ontario before my James Atkey came, roughly 1853, 1854, and went up to Campbell to be a lay preacher, teacher to the Indigenous folk. So it's interesting. Actually, one of the bonuses, we went to the tavern that is near to where her cemetery stone is at a church. They had a tavern called the Dairyman's Daughter, so we had to have lunch in there. Some of the additional items I found, Mason records for John, and they were very comprehensive, location, dates, and they fit between and they ended at the time he died, so that gave me pretty good, that made me feel comfortable. I found ones for him. There were apprentice records, which I was able to pull off Ancestry, but they don't tell you a lot, but they named his apprentices, and they provided the terms of service, and that's where you found out how many years they were tied up for. Poll books, which recorded people and locations, and then lists of electors. And what was really interesting, these lists of electors listed people and listed who they voted for. So when it created some friction in the community when people found out who you voted for, and there was even a suggestion that between the combination of voting for the wrong people and belonging to the Wesleyan Methodist religion, that may have been one of the reasons my James Atkey decided he was heading for Canada. The search has not ended. When I do most of my recording in the form of stories, and I like that. I plug in things. People say, well, how do you know what you need? Well, you just look at the holes. How good are the footnotes? Am I missing a date? What don't I have that I haven't proven? And that way I have them in very shareable form. I do have a pedigree placed on public pedigree on Ancestry, but it's simply the pedigree chart. That's all I did, because I didn't, that's all I cared to do at that point in time. I do have some of it on Legacy, but the only reason I liked it on Legacy was I could just print out, sometimes just print out the family tree and take it with me, or pass it on our family group sheet and pass it on to somebody. But all of my stories have a revision date on them. And even after I've quotation marks published in paper, I do not consider myself done, because it's amazing what turns up, especially now that so much more is being digitized, that you can't close the door. Like one of my neat searches was that I actually went and searched the Dufferin County Museum, and one of my families had trekked through there, and I found a baptismal record for somebody there in what was it? It was about 1834, and you know, that's pretty early, and especially for non-traditional religion. So I don't stop, keep looking, and I share out stuff. I have Dropbox accounts where I share things with other researchers who are searching in the same family, and I've got books I have written that are a draft form, and I share the entire book with people, because I figure I'm rapidly reaching the age where I may not be around to tell them. And I definitely put footnotes in, because there is nothing drives me crazy more than getting something like that chart I showed you at the first, where you've got all the family names hooked together and there's nothing that says where the information came from or the proof that those connections are actual. Okay, I'll stop there and ready and willing to answer questions. And you've got my email address. If you have questions afterwards as well, feel comfortable emailing me. I won't promise you 24-hour turnaround, but I will get back to you.
There is a question, Alan. The question is, at the beginning, when you showed a branch of your tree, did I see correctly that 2 brothers married 2 sisters? Did
Yes.
both couples come to Canada together?
No. Charlotte Waterloo stayed on the island. Her husband died, and she ran, I think, basically a boarding house, and died on the island. And her sister was in Canada and died in Canada, or died in Ontario.
You also have some kudos to your presentation.
Thank you.
Any other questions there, Linda?
No, that's all I can see on the chat line.
Okay. Well, Alan, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. There are some really interesting research sources that you covered that I know I'm going to check out. I'm helping my daughter-in-law research her grandmother who was adopted and in England and then came to Canada. So there's some, I'm itching to get my hands on my keyboard now. Couple of things I did want to just remind everyone of as well. I know, Alan, that you talked about Ancestry. And so most public libraries do have the library edition of Ancestry available for patrons to use free of charge. And the other one is My Heritage Library Edition. If you are an OGS member, you have access to the library edition of My Heritage. So, you know, if you don't have the paid subscription, those might be an alternative that's free for you to use as well. And if there's no other questions, Linda, then I think we'll thank you once again, Alan, for a wonderful presentation. And we're coming up on 8 o'clock, so the timing was perfect. And with that, we'll say goodnight, and hopefully we'll see you out in person at our November meeting at McKinley Funeral Center.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Good night.
Good night.